Welcome to the Wisdom K podcast, your authentic mental health and self-development podcast. Here, I share with you simple, sound, and well-researched lessons that will help you to function at your optimum. I hope you will learn something new today. Previous episode, we discussed the self-concept, defining what the self is, what the self-concept is, the dimensions or components of the self-concept, and how the self-concept develops. In today's episode, we will zoom into understanding the dimensions of one's self-image, which is one of the core components of the self-concept, and will proceed to discuss some key strategies for improving your self-image and by extension, improving your self-esteem. As we mentioned previously, your self-image can be simply defined as how you perceive or see yourself. So typically, when you paint a picture of yourself, what do you see? So if you imagine yourself, if you have a mental view of yourself, what do you see? That is your self-image. And the self-image can be considered from various dimensions. And in this particular episode, we'll consider 4 dimensions in which we can view the self-image. The first dimension of the self-image we will consider is the physical dimension. Now, this is a very key component of our self-concept in reference to the image we have of the self-image. Many people have challenges with their physical appearance. Specific features of their body become a source of distress to them. And for some individuals, this source or sense of distress relating to some particular part of their physical appearance goes extensively into who they believe they are. And this negative view of their physical appearance could lead to some conditions that can be very disturbing. So the physical dimension of the self-image relates to how the individual perceives some particular aspect of their appearance, their physical appearance. So whether it is about the skin color, whether they are black or fair, they are dark, they are brown, whichever color it is, the color of their eye, the color of their hair, how big their head is or how small it is, how tall they are or how short they are. Things relating to the physical appearance is the first dimension we talk about when it comes to the self-image. And individuals, have various things that would usually be ideal to us. And as we mentioned in the previous episode, one of the key components of the self-concept is the self-ideal or the ideal self, according to Carl Rogers. So we talked about the self-image, the self-ideal or ideal self, and the self-esteem. So there's an ideal physical stature that some people want for themselves. There are some ideals that we have in terms of skin color and all that, and it may not be so bad for people to have such ideals. But when these ideals of what kind of physical stature or shape we should have begins to affect who we believe we are, then we are heading for trouble. So there are some people that have a particular issue with their body weight. For instance, they may perceive their weight as being so much such that they would force themselves to be on a diet so that they can reduce that weight. And where this becomes a problem is especially when such weight that they are so concerned with is not the reality. So we mentioned in the previous episode how the ideal self, when it is so far away from the reality, the real self, then there will be incongruence, there will be frustration. And so individuals may have some negative perception of their body, whether it is their body weight, whether it is their body size, whether it is about their skin color, what have you, that has a significant influence on their esteem of self, the self-esteem. And so the value they place on themselves is tied to how slim I am or how tall I am. And so such a person who feels they are overly fat, which is not consistent with the reality, may then go into some bad eating habits as a way of reducing their body mass. So there are some conditions that relate to people having certain perceived flaws concerning their body, and typically we have what we call the body dysmorphic disorder, which is one of the disorders in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, a manual that is used by psychologists, psychiatrists, mental health professionals across the world. And with the body dysmorphic disorder, the individual feels that there is something wrong with their physical, stature. So there's something physically wrong with them. It may be about the size of their body, the shape of specific parts of their body, their head, their nose, or just a certain maybe spot on their body. Something on their body is not right, and they feel dissatisfied. They feel there's something missing about them because of that perceived flaw in their body or on their body. And individuals that have this body dysmorphic disorder, BDD, have a persistent way of perceiving or thinking about this flaw that they feel they have when it comes to their body. They are always thinking about it, they are always concerned about it. So what we call the intrusive thoughts, as they are sitting down for a meeting, as they are going about their daily lives, these thoughts about you are too slim, you are too tall, you are too fat, and all that keeps coming to them, and it affects their functioning, their self-esteem as a result of that. And beyond the body dysmorphic disorder, which you may want to read about subsequently, there are other body related issues, and some people's body focused negative thoughts are such that it causes them to, for instance, to engage in extreme exercising so that they can reduce their body weight, for instance. And it may be that this body weight they are even trying to reduce is not something that should be a cause for concern, but because they feel there's a flaw, they go the extreme to work on themselves to reduce this body mass, and it can have physical consequences on them health wise. So they are preoccupied with this sense of inadequacy, and this could be a challenge on many occasions. And this negative perception of something being wrong with the body, which other people may not be able to corroborate, or which may not be consistent with the reality on the ground, is an issue that we need to address. And as I mentioned in the previous episode, these ideas that are negative about ourselves, which is a component of what we are calling the self-concept, could be developed because of our childhood experiences. So there are some people that were told right from childhood that they are ugly, that they are too fat. In my part of the world, they will say you are obolo, for instance. That means you are fat, you're a fat Joe, and all those kinds of name calling makes certain people to develop a negative perception of their physical appearance or physical selves, and they will go the extreme, engage in behaviors that are not really helpful in order to compensate for the flaw that they believe that they have when it comes to their physical appearance. The second dimension of the self-image we'll consider is the psychological dimension. And when we talk about psychological dimension, we are looking at two things: the thinking component and the emotion component. So the bit about cognition and the bit about affect, emotions. So the view that people have of themselves, the picture they have of themselves as it relates to their thoughts, their beliefs, their ideals, their interests, their likes and dislikes, and all that, as we would classify under their personality, is the psychological dimension. So how somebody perceives themselves in terms of what makes them who they are, their thoughts, their beliefs, their way of assessing and processing emotions, whether they are sad, whether they are angry, what makes them unique, their personality, is the psychological dimension of the self-image. And in the previous episode, we discussed how John Bowlby in attachment theory talks about the internal working model and how the care and love a child receives can determine whether they see themselves as valuable, whether they see themselves as competent while interacting with others, and whether they can see others as trustworthy. And so this ability to perceive oneself as being competent, as being able to interact with other people, as being able to trust other people, based on our way of processing information, based on our way of handling our emotions, is the psychological dimension. And this understanding of self, this image that we have of our personality, can also influence what we do and the value we place on ourselves. Then there is the intellectual dimension, and this refers to how individuals perceive their intelligence. So there are times where people are made to feel they are dumb, they are stupid, and this goes to affect a lot of things about themselves. When they find themselves in different situations, how they are able to take initiative is affected, because they've been told as they have been growing that they are not good enough. And so that urge to take initiative is lost, because they feel not competent, they feel incompetent, they feel that they do not have the level of intelligence that others have. And so within the school environment, you'd find that they lack self-confidence. They are very slow in responding to questions because of the image they have about their intelligence. The final dimension we talk about is the social dimension. And the social dimension is connected to the psychological dimension, because how we perceive ourselves in terms of our beliefs, our ideals, in terms of our personality generally, influences how we perceive our place in society. So our interaction with others, as Bowlby mentions in one of the components of what the internal working model presents to the child, how competent or how effective they are in interacting with others, is seen in the social dimension. So how you perceive your role or place in society, whether I feel I am a leader in the society, whether I feel I am a leader in the group, whether I feel I am, a part of the group or not, whether I feel I am an outcast, whether I feel I don't belong, whether I feel I am the black sheep of the family. All of these perceptions, image we have of ourselves when it comes to our connection and place in society, is the social dimension. So there are many dimensions you can look at the self-image from. Bottom line is that your self-image is how you see yourself. So now, in improving your self-image, what do you do? In order to have a positive self-image, which by extension will influence the value you place on yourself, which we have defined as your self-esteem, what do you do? We will discuss 3 major strategies that can help you, and these are backed by research within the realms of mental health and psychology. These are practices that have been found to be effective. The first strategy is to examine what we call your self-talk. What is the self-talk? What is the self-talk? The APA Dictionary of Psychology defines the self-talk as an internal dialogue in which an individual utters phrases or sentences to himself or herself. So basically, you can have internal conversations with yourself that no other person can hear, and sometimes this self-talk is beyond your consciousness, meaning the conversations that are happening beneath your conscious awareness. And these conversations, these phrases, sentences, statements that you make to yourself influence how confident you are or how naive and fearful you are. It influences whether or not you believe in your abilities or you feel that you have a lot of flaws. And so that is the self-talk, the internal dialogue that we have with ourselves. And this self-talk can be both positive and negative. And in effect, a positive self-talk, internal dialogue, statements about who you are, your abilities, your strengths, what your aspirations are, and whether or not they are possible to achieve, can lead to a positive self-image, and by extension, positive and improved self-esteem. On the other hand, a negative self-talk, internal dialogue, which is affected, for instance, by your childhood, where there are some people that heard a lot about their physical selves, whether they are too dark, whether they are too fair, whether they are too slim, whether they are too short, and all these things can influence the kind of internal conversations they have with themselves. And so the negative self-talk, the negative internal dialogue, will lead to a negative self-image, and by extension a very negative self-esteem. So you want to sit with yourself. You can have a conversation at a conscious level with yourself. You can take a paper, you take a pen. If you want to use your phone, you have a notepad. Whatever you want to use, you want to write down what inner conversations you typically have. I am with myself in my silent moment. What are the things that run through my mind? What are the things that I tell myself? So if I'm a student, what are some of the things I've been telling myself when it comes to this particular subject or this particular course? The internal dialogue I have been having. You want to bring it into a conscious awareness so that you can examine those internal self conversations and know the ones that are positive and the ones that are negative. That is the first step to developing a positive self-image and self-esteem. So what inner conversations do you typically have? If it is related to your family, if it's related to your relationships, it's related to your work, your academic life, whatever it is, what are my inner conversations? In my quiet moments, in those moments where I do a reflection of myself, what are some of the things that I can see happening within my mind? Those conversations. Probably you were sexually abused. What are the inner conversations you have that reflect that experience, that terrible traumatic experience? You want to write them down. You want to note them down. These inner conversations are affecting you in significant ways that you may not be aware of. Your anxiety, your fear, your difficulty in taking initiative, they are being influenced by those inner conversations that you are not paying attention to. And number two, under examining your self-talk, what precipitated and perpetuates those inner conversations? Are there specific people that when I meet, those kinds of inner conversations appear? Probably there are some people that look similar to my parent or guardian or whoever I stayed with, who kept telling me that I am stupid and was comparing me to everybody and saying that I will never make it. Are there specific environments that trigger these internal self conversations, the positive ones as well as the negative? And if you find positive self conversations that are as a result of some positive experiences in your life, you want to ensure that those kinds of environments, those kinds of people, you spend more time within those environments and with those people, because it helps to improve your self-image and by extension the value you place on yourself, the esteem you have of yourself. The second key thing you can do aside examining your self-talk is to replace those negative self-talk that you have identified. So with the positive ones, you note them and you make sure that you keep ringing those things to yourself consciously. When it is things about teachers that told you you are the brilliant, student, and even though you had your own weaknesses and limitations, they kept encouraging you that you would one day become the president, you will become something, amazing. Reflecting on those positive conversations that happen anytime your mind takes you to those memories, is important. But the negative ones, you want to replace them. And in psychotherapy, one of the key things that is done using an approach called the CBT, cognitive behavior therapy, is to help you as an individual to identify those thoughts that are negative and replace them with positive thoughts. Sometimes we have what we call cognitive distortions. We have errors in our thinking. So those thoughts, whether it is about the physical self, the psychological self, the social self, or the intellectual self, you need to replace those negative thoughts. So you sit yourself down using your book, using a notepad, whatever it is, and write down your strengths. to write them down. If it's difficult identifying your strengths, what you can do is to talk to somebody, ask a friend, ask your parents, ask your siblings, ask somebody. So what are some of the things you feel I do well? What are some of the positives about me? And write them down. Take a stock from other people and you yourself, what you've identified as a strength or unique ability. So if your negative self-talk is about your physical body, maybe the shape of your head, for instance, you want to identify, are there unique, beautiful things about my head when it comes to my eye, or something that I may not have paid attention to. You want to intentionally replace the negative, self-perception you have. Ask somebody, let them genuinely tell you what they feel about your physical stature that is beautiful, that is unique. And then your abilities when it comes to your intellectual dimension of self-image, let them tell you, conversations you have with them, what is the key thing about those suggestions you make that they find to be unique and interesting, and give you instances where they felt that you were really able to give an intelligent remark. Write them down. It helps you to be able to find a replacement for the negative self-talks that you have. And under replacing the negative self-talk, what you also want to do, aside writing down your strengths and unique abilities based on your own assessment and that of others, is to practice imaginary talk or a mirror talk. So what this means is that you imagine yourself, if your fears are about speaking to a group because you feel there are some flaws that you have intellectually, physically, socially, or psychologically, personality wise, you want to imagine yourself having such a conversation with this crowd and being an audience to your own presentation. And in that imaginative presentation, you are telling yourself how good you are doing. And this is better than as you are standing in a mirror or anything that can help you to see a reflection of yourself as you talk. Telling yourself how you are doing well, and probably telling yourself that, this you did well, but you can do it better this way. That conversation with the mirror of yourself that you can see in the mirror or you can imagine is very important. The consistency of doing this every day, depending on the severity of your negative self-perception, doing it most of the time, often, consistency, practice, we say, makes perfect, gets you to a point where you are conditioned to now think of yourself in a high way, in a more positive way. And so one of the key things when it comes to personality development and behavior change is what we call conditioning. So in conditioning, you can either be conditioned in the negative sense or in a positive sense. So somebody who is exposed to a lot of negative talk over time may be conditioned to believe that indeed the negative things that have been said about them over time is true. Someone who receives a lot of compliments right from childhood, in many instances people are telling them how beautiful they are, over time they are conditioned to believe that they are indeed beautiful. And there are instances where somebody will tell you, no matter what you say, I am beautiful because my mom keeps telling me that I am beautiful. My dad keeps telling me I'm beautiful. Because right from childhood, they kept hearing that they are the princess of their parents, they are the Cinderella, they are the whatever it is. It has become part of their mindset. And in a different episode, we'll talk about mindset development. So practice the mirror talk or the imaginary talk. Talk yourself into believing in your skill sets, your abilities, your physical abilities and all. That is really very helpful. And the last strategy we'll talk about is to practice self-love and acceptance. When we talk about practicing self-love and acceptance, what it means is that you are having a practice of knowing yourself, accepting yourself, and believing that you are the best thing that could ever happen. You are not comparing yourself with others. So the first thing under practicing self-love and acceptance is not to compare yourself with others. Don't compare your abilities with others. It will make you feel less confident of yourself, or it will make you even sometimes, become complacent, especially when the people you are comparing yourself with are really not pulling their weight. Comparison is the thief of your joy. We can learn from people, we can look at how people are doing and see how we can improve. But the moment you are beginning to balance yourself on the scale of what others are doing and achieving, you will feel that on that scale you are really not anywhere. So according to an individual called Iyanla Van Zandt, comparison is an act of violence against the self. Comparison is an act of violence against the self. And this statement, I believe, goes really deep. So you'd realize that different situations and the comparison that you do will give you different perspectives. And so if you go about comparing yourself with the other person, for instance, feeling that you want to be as thin as the other person is, you will do whatever you want to do in order to get so thin, and then later you may regret, because once you begin to consider your thin self with somebody else who is not as thin as you, you may want to now change and become such as the other person. So comparison at the end of the day is you becoming violent to yourself, because you are not accepting yourself for who you are and making sure that whatever step you take to improve yourself is not necessarily because others look better than you or you think others are better off than you, but because you look at yourself, you accept yourself, and will only do what is best for you because of you. Number 2, under practicing self-love and acceptance, is to reward yourself for your little achievements and successes. In one of my books titled Designed for Excellence, or Outworking Your Excellent Nature, I talk about how self-reward is an important key for excellent living. That little achievement you had, including waking up early on a day that you were supposed to wake up early, including that good deed that you did to somebody, telling yourself you've done well, taking yourself out on a date, doing something to yourself as an acknowledgement of your improvement. If you were not doing well in a particular area of your work or student life, any step that you take that makes you better, reward yourself. You can reward yourself with gifts. You can reward yourself with words of encouragement, things that you tell yourself that are an acknowledgement of the good things that you are achieving, no matter how little they are. The third thing is to exercise regularly. Exercising has been proven as one of the key things that helps to improve how the individual feels about themselves. And there are some chemicals that are released during exercising. So in terms of our neurostructure, in terms of our brain and its communication with our body and all, there are some chemicals we refer to as the neurotransmitters, and these neurotransmitters are more or less messengers from our brain. They carry messages to other parts of our brain and other parts of our body through the nerves that we have, the nerve cells that we have. And one of the main neurotransmitters that helps to elevate our mood is serotonin. And when we exercise, we improve or increase the amount of serotonin in our system, and this livens us up. It improves our mood, makes us feel better. It's even important when it comes to our digestion system, our digestive system, and it does a lot to help with our general sense of well-being. And so exercising is important. Exercising improves your memory. It improves your physical health and many other things that will make you to have a general sense of being healthy. And once you feel healthy, it also impacts your sense of self, your image. of self. So exercising, whether it is rigorous exercise, going to the gym and pulling weights here and there, or just jogging, doing some squats, some wall pressing or arm pressing, whatever it is, just making sure that you are exercising regularly is important for developing a positive self-image and esteem. And the last thing is to practice mindfulness and other relaxation exercises. I'm sure in subsequent episodes that I'll be doing, there will be a time where we'll discuss mindfulness in detail, mindfulness and mindfulness meditation. But what mindfulness means is that doing something that keeps you in the present, keeps you in the here and in the now. It could be listening to music, sound music, the lyrics, of the music, very important, that helps you to focus on who you are and how far you have come. For instance, it could be songs, instrumentals, something cool, sound background that just keeps you focused on the now. And the idea is that as you are listening to it, you are paying attention to yourself in the moment. Sometimes it may not be through music. You just sit with yourself and you begin to do what we call positive visualization. So you take your mind on a travel, on a journey to a peaceful place. So take your mind to a peaceful place, the riverside, a very pleasant memory you've had in your life, probably your marriage ceremony, probably your graduation day, probably your first childbirth, probably a day you had with your best friend, a relaxing and pleasant situation or environment. You are pushing a button of calmness. You are traveling in your mind so that you can be relaxed. And this is something that when you do regularly, it takes your mind off the distractions all around you. It helps you to stay focused and grounded. So there are a lot of distractions, there are a lot of anxiety-provoking thoughts that will come to you. But the more you practice mindfulness, staying in the present, staying in the moment, by observing the beauty around you, mindful seeing, by being mindful with what you hear, mindful hearing, by being mindful as you are eating, the taste of the food, savoring it, being mindful, being accepting of the beauty of the moment. Very helpful. So these are 3 key strategies for developing your self-image and self-esteem. Examine your self-talk, both the positive and negative. Number 2, replace any negative self-talk by writing down your strengths and unique abilities and practicing the mirror talk or imaginary talk. And number 3, practice self-love and acceptance by all these 4 key ways that we mentioned under it. This will bring us to the end of today's episode of the podcast. I know there's a lot that you would have learned from this session, and I look forward to seeing you as we take episode 3 of the podcast next week, Sunday, 7:30 p.m. GMT. Before then, stay safe and as always, be a blessing to all. Bye-bye. Thank you for joining today's podcast episode. I hope you learned something new. Thank you and have a fruitful new week. Bye-bye.